Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakebite. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and in this podcast we talk all about things venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around this world. On this episode, I've joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Ed, and before we start I have to do a few formalities. Any views expressed in this episode are the views of the guests and the host, not the facilities or company they work for.
And today we have one of probably the biggest African herp guys joining us on the show. And today we have Stephen Spawls. Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Ross. Great to hear from you and Ed.
It's great to hear from you too, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on to this. I think for a lot of people who listen to this show and know who you are people are really excited to listen to it, and me and Ed are really excited to record this episode. So we'll get into it. So Stephen, how did you get into reptiles?
Well, when I was 4, I was born in London, but my father was a teacher, and he sort of wanted to get away from Britain. And we went to live in a town called Meru, up in on the northeast side of Mount Kenya. And it was a great place. I think, young people will naturally get interested in natural history if it's around them. And in Meru, it certainly was around us, we had, colobus monkeys in the forest near us. We had antelopes in the garden. Even some migrating elephants came down the road. And, I just got interested in the wildlife. I started keeping frogs. And I started, in our garden, we found Jackson's chameleons, spectacular animal. And I kept them. And there was a time there was a man called Jonathan Leakey had set up the snake park in Nairobi, and I'd read in the newspaper that he was interested in having reptiles. So we got some chameleons and we sent them to him through my father, and got a really nice letter back saying, this is extremely interesting. These are valuable animals. He hadn't got records from that area, and it filled me with enthusiasm. And then from there I went on and I kept a lot of rats and lizards and so on. And then at the age of 13, a friend of mine at school asked me to look after a pet snake. He was a boarder. He couldn't keep it. And I sort of took it with some trepidation. But while I was keeping it, I sort of became enthusiastic about it. So I asked this guy, if I could get some snakes for myself. And he said, they're easy to find. Start turning over rocks and you'll find them. And I did. And it sort of went on from there.
So what was that snake?
It was my first snake was a house snake, and I took it down to the Nairobi Snake Park. I didn't know what it was, and there was a curator there, an absolutely dynamic, charismatic man called James Ash, and Jim we called him, and he was one of these guys who fills you with enthusiasm. And he said, this is really interesting, it's a house snake, you can keep it, etc. And he wrote some stuff about it for me. And then I caught another house snake. And then my third snake was quite exciting. When I was at school one day, we'd been down at the river and looking for rats and stuff. And as we came up, the snake went across the track in front of us. And I thought, I'm going to catch that snake. And I went with a friend of mine, and as we approached it, this snake reared up and spread a hood. And it was a little Egyptian cobra. And nevertheless, while I was pretty nervous, I managed to pin it down with a stick, and we got it into a tin. And I took this down to the snake park. And James Ash was really excited, and he said, this is the first Egyptian cobra that is recorded from Nairobi. And, I was 13. At the time I was interested in other branches of science, but, I wasn't going to make any big discoveries in chemistry or physics that, those had already been done. But here, I'd made a herpetological discovery, and Jim Ash basically, made me feel sort of galvanized over this. I thought, wow, that's really something. So after I started collecting sort of more and more, and I also went to, I was a volunteer at the snake park, went to help there and so on, and all this stuff basically, it filled me with enthusiasm. I was making discoveries.
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty incredible. Was it 13, 15 or whatever you've already?
Yeah, I don't think my parents, realised how dangerous it was. This is one of the things, we started, fairly quickly. We started keeping dangerous stuff. And a friend of mine at school, a guy called Glenn Matthews, We formed a sort of snake collectors club together, and we had, my parents helped. My father made me some cages. Glenn's father sorted them out some cages, and we started catching stuff. And we started, around Nairobi, there's a bit of dangerous stuff, and we started keeping spitting cobras and garter snakes, and then we got some puff adders. And unfortunately, when I was 17, I got bitten by one of these puff adders. And I mean, the venom, it destroyed the base of the index finger on my right hand, and eventually my finger was amputated. And I think at that point, my parents had got hold of the idea that, keeping snakes is a dangerous business, but it was too late.
That's pretty, yeah, it's pretty incredible. Especially because we, on this show, we tend to talk a lot about snakebite and stuff, especially in African countries. It's quite interesting to hear that you were actually bitten in Nairobi. And so, what was the hospital care like back then when you were bitten?
It wasn't very, there is good hospital care in Nairobi, and there is good snakebite care because they are actually used to it. But at the same time, I mean, the guy who saw me, the doctor who saw me when I sort of turned up at the hospital, having done a whole lot of things wrong, like, for example, I tied a bootlace around the base of my finger and also injected antivenom myself into my arm. I mean, that could have killed me if I'd had an anaphylactic reaction, but I didn't know anything about it. The doctor basically looked at it and said, puff adders don't usually kill you. And they gave me a tetanus shot or something and sent me home. And that night, it swelled up hugely. There were massive blood blisters. I was readmitted the following morning. And when they sort of lanced these blisters, gangrene had started. And then there was a process of trying to stop the gangrene. And, you cut away the dead flesh and hope you've stopped it. And it kept sort of spreading and spreading. And, I mean, they did a skin graft. It didn't help. And eventually the gangrene got to the sort of the tendon at the base of the finger, and then I could no longer bend it. And the surgeon said he could save it, but I'd never be able to bend it. So he said we better have it out of the way.
It's pretty incredible to hear that you had the complications, and then you've still kind of, because obviously puff adders are probably a bit more serious than what they thought at that point in time. But as you say, with being where you were in Nairobi, you're probably in the best place within that country for it to happen.
Well, yes, exactly. On the other hand, if I'd gone to a sort of more remote bush clinic, they might have known something about it, But, I mean, care for snake bites in Africa in general is in a bit of a parlous state because, the supply of antivenom is erratic. In many countries, you can't get it. It's got to be, it's got to be kept cold and things like that. And because it's such snake bite is such a sort of random thing, you never know how many people are going to get bitten or where. The care tends to be very patchy. I mean, when I'm talking about snake bite treatment, I always say to people, if you are bitten, the most effective thing you can do is get quickly to a major hospital because they're likely to have antivenom. Whereas out in the countryside, they may well not.
Yeah, definitely, exactly. That's the moral of the story of kind of what a lot of our other episodes are about, where we've talked about snakebite in quite a few different countries now and different regions around the world, and they're kind of everybody sings from the same hymn sheet, which is great to hear. So yeah. And especially it makes a big difference when respected people are coming onto the show like yourself and like some of the other people we've had on, and they all turn around and say, no, we know the issues that there is. But we need to educate people to get people to go to the correct hospitals at the correct time, rather than it's all an education thing. So when people like yourself and like others that have been on the show say it, and other people can hear it, hopefully we can spread that information a bit further afield.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, most snake bites take place in tropical countries. Many of those countries have got financial problems, often through no fault of their own. Their medical services are not highly developed. Now, in a way also, the crucial thing where snakebite is concerned is raising living standards. You look at a country like Australia. Australia's got a lot of dangerous snakes, But when people get bitten in Australia, and they do get bitten occasionally, they've got mobile phones, they've got money, they've got transport, they've got rapid access to a hospital, and they've got, well-organised medical treatment, antivenoms available. That's not the case in a lot of places in Africa. And a lot of people also in Africa are bitten, purely by accident. They sleep in houses that you can't seal against snakes. I mean, this is something we take for granted. If you're a foreigner living in Africa, you take it for granted you're going to have a sort of stone-built house, the doors that fit tight, and you can shut the windows at night. You put a mosquito net over your bed. You can keep the snakes away. They don't get into the house. Most ordinary people in Africa, rural dwellers, live in sort of brushwood or mud buildings or poorly constructed buildings that snakes can get into at night, and people tread on them. And in a lot of those places, people don't have electricity, so they get out of bed at night, to go to the loo or to get a drink or something like that. They may not have a torch. There's a snake on the floor. They tread on them. They also farm by hand, in Australia and other countries where there's a lot of dangerous snakes. They do a lot of farming. The farming is mechanized, but in Africa, a lot of people farm by hand. It puts them in contact with dangerous snakes, and they haven't got decent footwear. That's a big sort of picture, And the way forward to reduce snakebite in Africa is by improving living standards.
Yeah, definitely. That's also another sentiment that a lot of people also talk about as well. So going back a few steps then, so how did you take your passion for reptiles from a young age and move that into a career, and a very successful, I'd say, successful career that you've had?
That's very kind of you, Ross, but I mean, it isn't my career, it's my hobby. I'm not a professional herpetologist. I was told a long time ago when I was doing my A-levels, in fact, by my biology teacher. He said, it's hard to make a living in biology. He said, because there's a lot of competition. He said, you're better off doing an engineering-type qualification and, basically doing your snakes as a hobby. And he was absolutely right. And in fact, it's a funny thing because, okay, I always kept snakes. I was enthusiastic about it. But after I'd done my A-levels, basically, and I worked for a while in Kenya, I felt like doing a degree. I actually studied geology, and I thought I would work as a geologist. As it happens, I joined VSA, which is the British Volunteer Program, and I got sent to Ghana in West Africa, and I found myself a geologist teaching physics in a government secondary school. And I found I enjoyed it. So basically, when I came back to the UK, I took a teaching qualification. Since then, I've always taught. So herpetology is my sort of passion, as it were. But it is, I don't get paid for it. There's not many professional herpetologists. I mean, there's a fair number, I think, in the United States, places like that. But here in Britain, there's not that many people who can do herpetology and get paid for it. It's my enthusiasm.
Yeah, definitely. But a lot of people would say, even though it's your hobby, you've been rather successful at your hobby.
Oh, thank you very much.
I think
yeah.
I don't
it's a
think
great thing, actually, because I enjoy it very much as well, And I like sort of communicating stuff. I try to write stuff because I like, that's the teacher in me. I like spreading the information.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why some of your books are the Bible. Some of them are, I would, for me, made a big difference to me keeping certain species and not keeping certain species through the year. And as you say, you've written a fair few different books now. You've helped describe a fair few different species as well. So kind of, especially in Africa. So I think you kind of, it's very, very well. I've kind of lost my words really, but
no, that's another good feeling actually. When you describe something, when you put a name to it, provided you haven't made a mistake and somebody else has already described it before you, in which case your name's going to be dumb. When you put your name to it, it's a form of immortality. When you give it a name, and then afterwards people think, oh yeah, Steve Spawls or whoever named this thing, and it remains there on the zoological record. It's a great feeling. But as a result of this, I can tell you there's quite a lot of big egos in taxonomy. People are sort of mad keen to name things and apply their names. And then some of them are over-enthusiastic about naming things or splitting things.
I think you can. I think you're allowed to call them cowboys. I think we.
Well, they're not necessarily all cowboys. I mean, we jokingly talk in taxonomy about the lumpers and the splitters. Now, the late great Don Broadley, who's a Zimbabwean herpetologist, a good friend of mine and a meticulous herpetologist, but Don was a big splitter. And whenever he looked at a snake, and he'd look at a population, he'd think, well, these ones here are different from these ones. And he tended to split them into two species. And then often, with the advent of molecular taxonomy, people doing similar things. And very often they found, okay, Don was right, He'd said these ones in East Africa are one species and those in Southern Africa are a different species. But there's another way of looking at this, and there's a very, very good taxonomist, a guy called David Hillis. And he had a paper out recently about the splitting of the American milk snakes. And he said in this paper these guys want to divide it up into 7 species. And he said in his view there is no more than 3 species, if that. And he used this interesting phrase. He said that what the researchers claim to be different species because the DNA is different are really just slices from different parts of a huge coherent population. And you can make that point with humanity. If, for example, you were to analyze the DNA, let's start at the equator, with, for example, somebody from the Sudan, and then you take the DNA of someone from Egypt, and then the DNA of someone from Greece, and then from Germany, and finally from sort of northern Scandinavia, you'd find their DNA differed quite radically. And somebody might say, well, that makes them all different species. But they're not, because humanity is a single coherent species, all interbreeding, we're all compatible. I think the same applies with snakes. But, as I said, if you're a taxonomist, you want to split these things up, you want to identify lineages, you want to give names to them. Fair enough, it does serve a purpose in many ways. But at the same time, I think what we've got to remember, I'm sorry, I'm on my taxonomist hobby horse here, is that in the end, species are dynamic and they change over time. Variation exists. Life only started once. Things have got more complex, and where some people say, okay, in this population you've definitely got 2 or 3 different species, another taxonomist will look at it and say it's just a single fairly variable species. Anyway, sorry, I'm ranting on about taxonomy.
No, genuinely, that's okay. We don't mind if you go on a rant or not. That would be fine by us. So, we're sticking on the taxonomy kind of bandwagon here. I think you've, as you say, you've described quite a few species, quite a few which are kind of dream species, kind of like pseudo-harsh goldie is definitely one of them that I know.
No, I didn't describe that.
Oh, did you not describe that? I don't know why I got in my head that you described that.
No. That was described more than 100 years ago. It's named after a guy called George Taubman Goldie, who was the Governor General of Nigeria. No. The big snake that I was involved in the description of was Bitis horrena, which is a large black and yellow viper from the Spawls Mountains in Ethiopia.
I was going to say that as well.
Yeah, but it was that one. A few other little things.
Have you actually seen one alive in real life? Because I know they're very, 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 very few people have.
I have not seen one alive. I mean, I would love to do so. They're not that common. I mean, we sort of latched onto this purely by a couple of pieces of luck. A number of years ago, I was working with a guy called Malcolm Largent. I mean, he's dead now, poor man. He did a lot of work in Ethiopia, particularly on frogs, but also on other animals, reptiles, and mammals. And Malcolm wrote a very good paper on the snakes of Ethiopia. Later on, I did a book with him. And there was this, in the preserved collection of the museum in Denmark, Copenhagen, there was this big preserved viper that no one could quite put a name to. It looked a bit like a cross between a puff adder and Bitis parviocula, which is the Ethiopian mountain adder. And I said to Malcolm, we ought to do something about this. And he said, well, it's probably just a hybrid. So we left it at that. But it's a very distinctive looking animal. And then a ornithologist who was driving in the Bali Mountains on a road down through the forest saw one of these things on the road. He didn't catch it, but he photographed it. He sent us the photos. And as soon as we saw this, we thought, wow, this thing isn't a hybrid, because here's a living thing from some distance away from where the original animal was. So we got on with describing it. And there was a team of us. It was led by David Gower at the Natural History Museum, a very, very good herpetological illustrator called Ed Wade, and Tim Colston, who's also done some work in Ethiopia. And between us, we basically described this snake. And it was a little bit speculative in that we had one preserved specimen and the photograph of a live one that wasn't collected. But we thought, well, it's distinctive enough. Okay, we didn't have any DNA either. And subsequently, 2 or 3 more have been seen. I don't think anyone's collected one alive yet.
I think somebody from a set of people from a group of people from Sweden may have actually been gone and actively looked for them and found them. I think
they found one. That was Jonas Arvidsson.
That's it.
And in fact, he has very kindly lent me his photographs. He was with a team of 4. They photographed it. They found a living specimen and photographed it. He's lent me some photographs, which are going in our forthcoming Dangerous Snakes of Africa book. So yeah, he didn't collect it. He just photographed. Well, I think they picked it up, but they didn't remove it. They then released it.
No, I believe if you speak to him, he says that from memory's sake, when I spoke to him, he said that it was released. It was photographed and released.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think something like that. As you say, that we don't really know much about them.
Well, sooner or later, I think you know what it's like with these big vipers. There are enthusiasts who are mad keen to get them. I think sooner or later, someone's going to sneak into Ethiopia and get some out.
Yeah, that's a bit of a worry, but at the same time, I can see like a lot of people do it. And like,
it's not. I mean, they wouldn't be able to do it officially in that you're not supposed to export stuff from Ethiopia, but having said that, I mean, I don't really object to people collecting stuff, and I certainly don't object to people keeping live animals, because I think it's a great thing. It's the way I became a herpetologist, because I was able to keep things. And also, in Ethiopia, the risk to a snake like that are not from people collecting from the pet trade. The risk, as it is worldwide, is destruction of the habitat. This snake lives in a forest. It's a very desirable forest, and it's got big trees which people want for the timber. And, of course, they also want to fell and grow crops. And that is the danger. I mean, I think we don't really know. I mean, apart from the first specimen of this snake, which was from a town on the plateau, and in fact, it probably didn't actually come from that town, because the town itself is an open grassland. It was probably brought there by a collector. All the others have been seen along this one road which descends through the forest. Now, the forest spreads to sort of 30 miles on either side of the road. They must be out there in the forest. I don't think they're in any danger from snake collectors, but they are where they are at risk is that people want to log those forests.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's something we're seeing with a lot of different species as well, worldwide.
Yeah.
Is I think Lechesis muta on the Atlantic rainforest coast Atlantic rainforest is being destroyed, habitat's being destroyed, and
I remember that talk about it.
Yeah, from squirrel at the.
This other beautiful tree viper, the Mangshan viper in China, spectacular animal. And I gather, I don't know, I haven't direct knowledge, but I gather that its habitat is disappearing.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of species, unfortunately, and probably the human drive to own more and do more than what is the natural resource for it, really. I think that's another conversation we could have all day, and Ed would probably love that conversation. There
are 7 billion of us, and increasing all the time.
Yeah.
And we need resources, and we need spaces to live. And this is the thing. I mean, I think I'm not sort of unhopeful for the future of humanity, but it's going to take a while before population growth stabilises.
Yeah, and we don't really know what's going to happen until for the next couple of years, we see what's happening. We've got a lot of renewable energy sources coming along, a lot of new green-based automation, automotives, and long-haul travel. So we will see how that develops. That's not really herpetology, so I don't particularly think as much as our listeners would probably have that discussion. I don't think it's necessarily what they'd like to listen to is us rabbling on about.
I don't hear the environmental stuff. Let's get back to the snakes.
So you've written quite a few different books. So what made you start writing books, and kind of what was your favourite book to write, and kind of?
My mother was basically an English teacher. Always pushed me to write from the sort of earliest age. She taught me to read young, and then basically got me writing and encouraged me to keep a diary, encouraged me to write my experiences. And when I sort of said glibly as a child, I thought I'd like to write a book, she didn't say, ha, you can't. She said, oh, you have a go. And I always wanted to write. And I mean, I just wrote and wrote. And I mean, early on, I started reading the history, the natural history literature in East Africa, in Kenya, where I was living. And, I thought, I read some of these sort of natural history notes and things like that, and I thought I could do that. I've got some observations which are valuable. And I started writing things, and then after a while I realised, the way you do this, you've got knowledge that not everyone has. And, I was inspired to sort of spread that knowledge. I mean, the first book I did was, in fact, a book called Sun, Sand and Snakes, which was autobiographical about my childhood in Kenya, collecting snakes. And I was dead lucky, and I wrote this thing, and I thought it was quite good, and I took it to a publisher, and they said, this was Collins, who had a big East Africa list. They published Joy Adamson and people like that. And one of the sub-editors there thought...
Stephen, could I just get you to stop for 2 seconds, please?
Shape, and he went on from enjoyed writing is my field guide. There was a team of 6 of us. It was the...
Stephen, can you hear me? Sorry, I've just had a problem.
All right. What do you miss?
Basically, all of that. I don't know why the phone decided it was going to turn itself off and turn itself back on again, but it didn't.
Right. Okay.
It didn't turn itself off, which is really weird. So, could you just repeat that for me, please?
What we about the books?
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Yeah, if you could just start from the start again, please, that would be great.
Yeah, I was saying that my mother encouraged me to write, and I started writing sort of natural history notes and things like that. I was reading the literature of the East African natural history, and I thought, I can do this sort of stuff. So I started writing little nature notes and so on, and the magazines published them. And then I wrote a book about my adventures in Kenya called Sun, Sand and Snakes. And as I said, I was dead lucky. I took it to Collins, the publisher, and they were interested. They had a big, the Collins had a big East Africa list. They published people like Joy Adamson and so on. And a sub-editor saw it and thought, well, we can knock this one into shape. And I was really pleased when they published that. The book that I most enjoyed writing is one that I've always wanted to do, was the field guide to the reptiles of East Africa. You still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
Yeah, right. And basically there was a team of 6, and I sort of put the team together, and we did it together, and Academic Press published it. And then they were taken over by ANC Black, who are now Bloomsbury, who did the reprints. And then a few years ago, I spoke to an editor there about doing a revision of that, and he said, yeah, let's do it. So that came out beginning of last year. I'm really pleased with them. I mean, they're basically, youthful books. They're sort of almost textbooks, and they'll sit on people's bookshelves for a long time. People will put it down when they want to identify a snake or a lizard.
Yeah, it's one of the books that I have on my bookshelf.
Have you got the original issue with the original edition with the chameleon on the front?
I do, yes, yeah.
Yeah, on a black background.
My dad bought it me, and I think I was about 19, 20 at the time.
All right.
I just really kind of got into reptiles properly at the time. I'd been keeping bits and pieces, but it was just I just liked animals in general, and then reptiles became the obsession, really.
Right.
And it was at that point my dad saw it and bought it me as a Christmas present. So
that's great.
So, yeah, and I think Ed's got the new one, haven't you, Ed?
Yeah, I got a revised version.
I hope he has. I sent him a copy.
Yeah.
I had a marvellous day last summer with Edd and Paul. They really helped me, and they wrangled the deadly stuff at Liverpool, and I got some really nice photographs, which are in fact have gone into the latest edition of the Dangerous Snakes book.
It was an absolute joy for both of us.
Yeah.
And the book lives on the corner of my desk.
Oh, great.
It was the first thing, Ed, when I first met Ed, it was the first thing he showed me.
All right. I mean, I at the beginning of the acknowledgements, this is something I point out, that basically I am in the debt of people like Paul and Ed and guys like James Ash in Kenya and Royan Taylor and so on. These are the people who, who were at the sharp end. They handled the deadly stuff while I took the photographs, made sure I didn't get bitten, And in a way, it's also a great pleasure working with people like that. And you see their techniques, There's no getting away from it. I mean, the team at Liverpool, they know they're deadly snakes, and they know how to look after them. They know how to handle them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something we can all kind of shout about. I think they are one of the best from seeing other institutes and such forth firsthand. I think they are definitely one of the best in the world at what they do, and we're lucky to have that. We're lucky to have that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is something we're very proud of at Liverpool, and I mean, hats off to Paul. Paul is the man who makes it happen. He has done for the past 27 years now, so he definitely knows what he's doing, and it shows in all of his work. It always comes across that it's his passion, the same as it does with you and your writing, and even the stories you tell. You can hear the passion in your voice, and it makes it so much more fun to work alongside someone like that.
Someone who's got the enthusiasm, who cares for the animals. I mean, I've seen, dare I say it, all over Africa, a lot of sort of bad snake parks and bad institutes where people didn't really care about the husbandry, And I mean, it's a pleasure to see a place where it does happen. I mean, this is the thing that, at the minute, the coming thing, they want to really get cracking onto producing decent anti-venom for Africa. And one of the problems is that, there are very few institutes where they know how to maintain the snakes and milk them and, treat the venom correctly so that it doesn't basically decompose and it's still potent when it's used for the production of anti-venom. And I mean, this is the thing. I mean, in Liverpool, okay, they're obviously a long way away from where the snakes actually come from, but they're doing it properly. And one's hopeful. I mean, I know Paul and Ed and Rob Harrison are trying to get this sort of thing set up in Kenya as well, and Nigeria, where basically, the people will benefit from their expertise. And, let's face it, if you're going to produce anti-venom for Nigerian snakes, it makes sense to have your institute in Nigeria, in that the snakes are easily obtainable.
I'll definitely agree with that one.
And it's the reason why we want to set up facilities outside of Western countries, in effect, because when, for example, the African Snakebite Research Group, when that kind of pulls out of the main support, they've got the infrastructure behind to carry on the work and hopefully develop further.
Yeah, that's it. You guys provide the sort of motive and then and the expertise, and then hope they can take it on from there.
It's seeming very positive. We're getting good feedbacks all the time from the Kenyan facility, and we're working alongside them to help improve it constantly.
Yeah, that's right. Did you hear the sad news about Royan Taylor?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
It was quite a shock.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big miss.
A big shame.
Yeah.
He's going to be a very big miss to everything.
Yeah, definitely. He had the enthusiasm and he basically ran the place, And I mean, I hope they can find someone to sort of take over from him.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, it's hard to know where to go from that, really, because I think he's such a big loss to snakebite and to the herpetological world.
Herpetological world, that's right. Yes, I know. I mean, when I heard the news, I was shocked. I thought first it must be a snake or something, but he basically had this very aggressive form of leukemia. So anyway, let's look on the bright side. I'm sure there's quite a lot of expertise there at the coast, so we're lucky.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Find someone to take over.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully that will be the case, and hopefully his work can be carried on in the best light and in the best position that it can be. And somebody else with his enthusiasm, or as much enthusiasm, or maybe not as much, but is interested enough that the work carries on in the correct way. So
that's what counts in a way, the enthusiasm. If you've got a bit of, passion for your particular field. I mean, I've seen, people who run snake parks and they've just done it as a job, basically. And okay, that's fine, but people just get paid. If you've got a bit of enthusiasm, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, and I think speaking to people like that we have on this podcast, like people like yourselves, like that is the biggest driving difference, I think, from speaking to a lot of people, that is that passion, and is that kind of, you can tell the drive that these people have to help in these situations, and to help with the research, or help with on the ground work and the education that is needed there and stuff. And it's great to hear that there is these kind of people around, and yourself being one of them, that are actually moving on herpetology, and obviously as well the medical side of it as well, obviously with the biomedical uses of venoms and such forth as well, which we've had a few episodes on that as well. So it's great to hear all these people talk. But I think we're getting quite sidetracked. We like to get sidetracked on this show. It happens a lot, so don't worry about that one. So your latest book that's going to come out, Dangerous Snakes of Africa. So how did that come about? How did it come about writing that book, and kind of how did you, and what work are you doing, and how do you go about formulating a book? Kind of what animals to include, what animals not to include? Because dangerous snakes in Africa, there's pretty much most of them.
Well, it started, originally, Bill Branch and I did it back in 1993, okay? I was in Ethiopia at the time, Bill was in South Africa. We were sort of corresponding, and Bill sort of got this idea about the Dangerous Snakes book. Do you feel like joining me? And I said, yep, let's do it. And we did it together, and it was published by Blandford. And back in those days, they printed 9,000 copies, and we produced fairly detailed maps, and we got pictures of quite a lot of things. And this was a hell of a business sourcing the pictures. This was in the days before the internet, before email or anything like that. We relied on sort of personal connection. But we got together, reasonable set of pictures. We'd been looking at a museum, looking at specimens, looking at literature, working out where stuff lived. We got a reasonable database, and Blandford published it. And what startled us was how enthusiastic people were about it, especially medical people. And they said, for the first time, we've got pictures of the snakes, dangerous snakes in a particular area. And not only that, but, we know where they live, and we have some idea about how dangerous they were. I got a letter from a Somali doctor based in Mogadishu, and he said, it's the first time I've come across a book that tells me what dangerous snakes are in Somalia and how dangerous they are, and we've got pictures so we can identify them. So it went down well. So, after a while, and of course the taxonomy has changed. When we wrote that book, there were 7 species of cobra listed for Africa. Now there's 20. And the funny thing is, of course, they're not new things. There hasn't been people who've been out there in the wild finding new cobras. It's the taxonomy has split them. What was one species, the forest cobra, is now 5. What was one species, the Egyptian cobra, is now 4. But basically, it needed updating. And there's a guy called Johan Murray, very, very good herpetologist based in South Africa. And he said to Bill and I, you need to upgrade your book. So we thought, all right, let's have a go. And we approached my publishers, and they said, yeah, let's go for it. But the tragic thing was, we got started into this, and then Bill got motor neuron disease.
Oh, no.
And tragically, the man, he sort of thought he'd go on for a while, like old Stephen Hawking. But in fact, he died in not much over a year. So basically, I've had to finish it. So I hope it's going to be a decent sort of monument to him. He was one hell of a photographer, Bill. He sent me a really nice set of pictures. So they're going in the book, along with some pictures of my own. And the other thing that made a big difference with this book, is that the literature's available, and it's available very quickly. As I said, back in 1993, when we were doing the original edition, we relied on friends who we sort of knew had pictures of this species and that. Nowadays, you can go on the internet and find the pictures. And in fact, I submitted the manuscript a couple of weeks ago, And then my sub-editor got on to me today and said, one of the snakes you hadn't got a picture of, I managed to find one on the internet, you know. I mean, you never do that in the past, you know. So, yeah, we think it's going to be a good book.
It's definitely one that will be adding to my collection, definitely.
Oh, that's very kind
with
of
being,
you.
with being an African venomous snake kind of enthusiast, I think it's safe to say they are definitely something that I will be. It will definitely be something I'll be adding.
Well, that's great. I hope you enjoy it.
I will do. There's no question about that one. No, it's quite crazy because in Africa, like, you've got so many venomous snakes that are from so many different locations and localities of them, especially stuff like puff adders, which will range right the way from the Persian Peninsula all the way through Africa. And I mean all the way through Africa. You've got these species that do that. So how have you gone about doing that as regards to are your pictures have you gone through by country?
Well, we have tried. I mean, I was looking at my puff adder pictures just now, and I've got one from Botswana, I've got one from Morocco, I've got one from Ghana, I've got one from Ethiopia. Having said that, the puff adder is not a snake that varies a lot. So I mean, if you've got a decent clear picture showing the snake, you know, it's got that obvious triangular head and white line between the eyes and the V shapes on the back. You know, people should be able to extrapolate and say, okay, Steve's picture shows a grey one, I'm looking at a yellow one, but you know, the pattern's pretty much the same. The difficult thing is where you've got a snake that varies a lot in colour, but is otherwise nondescript. And I'll give you a classic example: the Egyptian cobra.
Yeah.
And the Egyptian cobra, as now defined, occurs right across the northern half of Africa. From Morocco, it goes on the coast to Egypt, comes down the Nile, into Sudan, into Kenya, Tanzania, right across to the west. And I've got in the book, I've got a picture of a black one from Morocco. I've got a picture of a red one from Ethiopia. I've got a yellow one from Nigeria. I've got a mottled black and yellow one from Eritrea. And I've got a sort of dull brown one as well. They vary a lot.
That's definitely... I think a lot of people especially with Haji from the Egyptian cobras, think that because of captivity they come in black or brown, because obviously in captivity they're either from the Sinai Peninsula kind of area, maybe onto mainland Egypt, or from Morocco, and they're the two localities that are in captivity. It's like recently I've seen one. I can't remember where it was from. Edd, you may remember, and it was bright yellow with black speckles, and just like, hang on a minute.
That's the Nigerian one, I should think. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's obviously in Kenya they've got them in black and white. Like,
black and white, yeah.
Yeah, like Mukau, kind of like almost Siamensis looking, Naya Siamensis
looking.
looking.
Those are the ones from up on the border near Uganda, what they call the calico cobras. Now, I didn't manage to get a good picture of one of them, actually.
It's funny you should say that. There's one that's at our Kenyan facility.
Yeah. You got one at Liverpool, Ed? Oh, right.
No, in the Kenyan facility.
Oh, in the Kenyan facility. Oh, right, sorry. In Bioken?
No, in the Kenyan snakebite Research and Intervention Centre, the facility for us.
Oh, right. Where is that based?
Near the Institute for Primate Research.
Oh, in Tigoni?
Yeah, I believe so.
Just outside Nairobi?
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, right. Well, if you can persuade anyone to produce a picture, get a picture of it there, that would be great.
We've got a low-quality picture, but better pictures could possibly be taken at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I know a guy who was in Uganda, and he caught one of these things. And he took he sent me a couple of pictures. I don't want to give his name because he worked hard on these pictures, but they were all terrible. I mean, you'll appreciate this, Ed. It's not that easy to take a good, clear picture of a snake.
No, it's definitely not.
I can vouch for that as well.
You don't realise until, the skills that you've got when you photograph snakes, until you see other people's efforts. And, of course, I see them a lot on Facebook. But Johan Murray told me a really interesting story about that. He was involved with a multidisciplinary team producing a big red atlas for Southern Africa of all the reptiles. And it was a citizen science thing, and they got quite decent amount of funding, and they went out and they went to schools and universities, and they took people into the field, and they did pitfall trapping and fence trapping and stuff like that, and they got a lot of specimens, they got a lot of records. And Johan invited all the people that were involved with the research effort to submit their photos for use in the atlas. And he said he got well over 1,000 pictures sent in. And do you know how many of them were actually usable?
Very little, probably.
3.
3. It does not surprise me at all.
Just goes to show it's not that easy to take a good, clear picture of a snake, that is diagnostically useful. You've got to show, it's got to be in focus. You've got to show the head. You've got to show the body and the tail and things like that. And I mean, a lot of the really great snake pictures you see, the sort of things that make National Geographic, you look at them and think, that's a hell of a picture. But it wouldn't be any good in a field guide because the thing's rearing up and you can just see the head from the side or something. You want to be able to see the whole thing. So yeah, it's not that easy to take a good picture of a snake.
Yeah, that's one thing that I had some of the undescribed water cobras, which are CF annulata.
Oh yeah, these ones from the mouth of the Congo River.
Yeah, from Lake is it Ndombe?
Ndombe, yeah.
Yeah, Ndombe. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had 3 of them. They didn't particularly last very long in captivity. Some people have been really lucky with them. Some people have been, like myself, were less lucky with them. And I had Wolfgang come over to photograph them and take venom samples.
All right.
And it took him probably about 3 hours to get a decent photo. He was happy with of them. It took a while.
Right.
Yeah, we had to keep putting it back, getting it back out later on after he'd had a look through, after we'd photographed a couple of more animals, and then it was a bit of an adventure, a bit of an adventurous day. But
it's funny you should mention that, because that is a really interesting complex, because there's a smaller species called it used to be called Boulangrina christii. Now it's just Naja christii. And then there's this typical annulata, but then there's this what they call a dwarf form. Well, it's not really a dwarf form, it's just a bit smaller, which doesn't have the rings. And in fact, I managed to get a good picture of one of them from a herpetologist called Eli Greenbaum, who's done quite a lot of work in Congo. But the typical annulata, I struggled to get a really good picture of, and also the christii I struggled. I've got a couple of pictures which are tolerable.
There's not many. I think half the issue with christii is that a lot of them are misidentified, and not many people actually have christii in captivity, I believe.
No.
Quite a few people have annulata now.
Yeah.
Or CF annulata, these smaller dwarf forms, which nobody's sure if they are their own species or they're not their own species. I think there is some work going on to identify them properly currently.
Well, I think Wolfgang said that in his initial runs he had some DNA. He said they weren't showing up as any different from typical annulata.
Yeah, so
he couldn't pick up any scale counts either.
So he took photos and scale counted them while he was at my house, and he took scale clippings as well for DNA, and obviously venom as well to do venom analysis. Well, to give to LSTM to do a venom analysis, and there was 9/10 of bugger all there. Literally, they would not give any venom. It took ages to get them to even bite the glass, but they just wouldn't do it. But it was quite interesting. It was quite an interesting learning experience for me, because it was the first time I'd ever had somebody like that, or spoke to somebody like that, and kind of done that kind of work with anybody. And for me, it was really fascinating. Just being a hobbyist that's got a very keen interest in the science and the herpetology, kind of, because obviously I am just a herpetoculturist at the end of the day. It's really interesting.
No, it is fascinating stuff, and it turns out, I think you see there's a fair number of collectors who are catching stuff for the pet trade down there at the mouth of the river in Kinshasa. And they're sending stuff out. And apparently, I knew a South African guy who went there to do some collecting some years ago, and he said these little cobras, the dwarf ones, are quite common along the floodplain. He said, if you go and turn rocks, you can find these things. When this guy South African guy went out looking one morning and he found 3 or 4. And he said the guys who were with said, they're not uncommon here.
Mm-hmm.
And consequently, they're coming back here into the pet trade. But, I mean, that's not a snake, I would say, that's very suitable for the pet trade. I mean, I think these guys put together a box full of snakes and send it to a dealer. The dealer never quite knows what they're going to get. Some of that stuff is saleable, and people are enthusiastic about it. There's good sort of rodent-eating stuff in there, but a lot of stuff isn't really, and you never quite know what you're going to get.
No, I think that's part of it. There's some people in Europe are doing really well with them, and I do know of at least one person, if not 2 people in the UK with proper annulata, with the rings, that are doing really well in captivity. They're not breeding, and they are purposely trying to breed them, but they're not breeding in captivity just yet. But they are being kept alive.
They're being kept alive, yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely a species that I'd like to venture back into at some point, but only when I can give it a big water area where I can have chillards in the water and let them fish and do what they'd like to do naturally, kind of thing.
We had one, a Lake Tanganyika one, which is the subspecies Annulata storm's eye, many years ago, and this snake did all right. It fed on frogs. We kept it in a cage with a sort of fairly large pool. And it spent a lot of time in and out of the pool, but it ate frogs.
That wouldn't be particularly too hard in captivity, I don't think, to supply. Especially if it's your only frog feeder. I think you'd be pretty okay with that. But yeah, again, we keep getting off topic onto random African herbs, but I don't particularly mind that too much. But going back, as you were saying, going back to kind of talking about the Egyptian cobras and stuff, there's a lot of other species, isn't there, that are like that. I think you can. I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head is quite hard right now.
Boomslang is one of them.
Yeah, boomslang definitely. I think a lot of people. Another one that people struggle to breed in captivity. I've got some theories behind that, but that's just me personally. But yeah, boomslang are very highly variable. More north you go, different head shapes and everything with them. So
tremendous range of colours.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, again, does anyone in this country maintain boomslangs?
LSTM have some.
We've got 2.
Oh right.
We had 3, but one unfortunately had to be euthanized. Had a growth in its nose.
Oh right.
There is 2 others.
So we now have 2.
Yeah. There's 2 others that I know. 2 other people that say they have them. However, producing pictures of them seems to be hard work, which I find quite odd. Because I used to have a baby, and I am getting some more at September ham. Some more youngsters at September ham. So I'm going to give them another go.
All right.
So yeah, so. Yeah, hopefully.
Ed, do you get venom from this snake?
It's one of the species that we now just have and haven't tried extracting from for a while. I know that Paul and Rob spent hours trying to extract from them using different dishes, different extraction techniques, and the yields are so low that we've given up.
I was going to say, I mean, the thing is, of course, they've got grooved fangs, so, to get the venom to flow down the fang past whatever the snake is biting into, it must be a hell of a business.
They struggled massively.
Yeah. I know Jonathan Leakey at one point was after some boomslang venom. This is in the 60s in Kenya. And what he tried was he tried firstly with the living snakes, getting the snake sort of pinned down on a ball. I think he taped it down, and then gave it an electric shock. And he reckons he got some venom that way. But
similar to what they do for centipedes and basically most arachnids as well.
Yeah. But, well, Jonathan found this so laborious, and in the end, I mean, there are places in Kenya where you can get a lot of boomslangs, and what he did was he just got them and euthanized them, and then, dissected out the venom glands and squeezed them that way.
Yeah, it's if you've got a ready supply, it's probably a lot easier to do it that way.
I still think that's I still think that is the process that they get venom for antivenom, which is one of the reasons why antivenom costs so much.
Well, the other thing, of course, with a boom slang, it's not a snake that anybody gets bitten by except snake handlers.
Who are messing with it, and they're incredibly docile snakes. I love working with them.
Yeah, not just that, but because they're an alert diurnal tree snake, if you come across one in the bush, it just moves away,
Yeah.
And I mean, when I was sort of researching the stuff for the Dangerous Snakes book, I did come across 3 bite cases that weren't, suffered by snake handlers. And one of them was a child who put his hand into a weaver bird nest, and the snake was inside, and the snake bit him. The snake had obviously gone in to eat the eggs. Another one was one slid across a compound in Kenya and over a toddler who kicked it and sort of inadvertently trapped the snake, which turned and bit her. And somebody else was walking through the bush and trod on the snake without seeing it, and it turned and bit.
I think there was one recently, wasn't there? That was he a snake handler? I think Arno.
The guy who died quite quickly.
Yeah, the one in South Africa.
Yeah, Arno Nordea was telling us.
He was a South African, and he had 2 bites, so he must have been handling it.
Mm-hmm.
And he died in about, I think, 8 or 10 hours. That's
it was
very
very
unusual.
quick.
Yeah, exactly so. Yeah. Although, as you gentlemen know, I mean, when a snake bites, you get an injection of toxins. There's a mixture of stuff. And there may be something in there which has no effect on one person, and somebody else.
A massive effect on someone else.
Yeah. I mean, you get these very occasional cases where people are bitten by burrowing asps, Atractaspis, those are called stiletto snakes. And there's been a lot of research on them in southern Africa, and there's never been any deaths there, although there's a lot of bites. But there's a few bites in Central Africa where people have died, and sometimes they die quite quickly. Now, these snakes have got these sporophyllotoxins. It affects the heart, and it may be some people are susceptible to these things. And so burrowing asps may be more dangerous than we think. We usually look on them as not being particularly dangerous snakes, but there've been a few deaths.
I definitely wouldn't want to get bitten by one.
I've been bitten by one. I was bitten by one in Ghana. I mean, but, just the usual thing. My finger swelled. I picked it up. I thought it was another snake. There was one big burrowing asp in my area, the Dahomey burrowing asp. I found this snake. I knew it wasn't that. So I thought it must be a snake called a purple gloss snake. Amblia dipsa. So I picked it up. Bit me in the finger. The finger swelled up quite large, and you get this weird greenish discoloration, and then a bit of necrosis. But at the time, I just thought, well, there's no anti-venom. You don't do anything much about it. That was all. But, I think I'd be a bit more cautious these days.
So, I'm gonna keep it on a bite situation then. So, how many times have you actually been bitten?
God, it's very embarrassing. I've been bitten 8 times by dangerous snakes. And of all those bites, only 2 were particularly bad. The first one from the puff adder when I lost a finger, and this one from the burrowing asp. All the others, the symptoms were very minor or sort of non-existent. And all due to carelessness, I mean, you talk to someone like Paul, I don't think Paul's ever been bitten. But, basically...
He's been hospitalised 3 times.
Sorry?
Hospitalised 3 times.
Oh, has he? Oh, right. Oh, well.
Yeah. But the last one was 17 years ago.
Oh, right. Oh, well, yeah, that's it. So he's basically perfected his technique. I mean, my last bad bite was in 1988. But these days, if I come across something dangerous, as I start to get out of the car, my wife grabs my collar.
It's probably with growing older, your wife is probably being more sensible.
Well, yes, exactly. But, the worrying thing is I've got 2 sons, and the younger one particularly is mad keen on herpetology, I mean, he wants to catch the deadly stuff. He's caught a bit of stuff, and of course, my parents were blissfully ignorant of the risks, but I'm all too aware. It's a worrying thing. You can't stop your children getting interested in these things, but at the same time, it's a bit nerve-wracking sometimes.
It's a bit hard to tell them not to do it as well when you've got the experience and the stories and everything else that they probably heard 1,000 times.
They want to do it, because you've done it. I mean, the elder one did a lot of rock climbing, I just sort of scrambled a bit. And this guy, my son then took it up. I mean, some of the stuff he did made my blood freeze, And I mean, diving as well. They're both heavily into diving, I mean, they do sort of quite dangerous diving. Anyway.
Yeah, that's
You can't stop them. You can't stop them.
No, it's probably what our parents think of for me and Ed playing with venomous snakes all the time. But
Yeah.
to be fair as well, so
Yeah.
they probably feel and probably my parents who listen to this will probably feel the same pain that you do regarding that.
No,
So yes.
It's a risk,
Oh, sorry, say that again, please.
I just said it's a risk.
Yeah,
It's a risk you have to take.
Yeah, it is. But if you enjoy it and you love it and you're passionate about it, you could, as you say, you could get hit by a bus walking down the street tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So don't do things you're not going to enjoy.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Or you're attacked by some virus,
Yeah, definitely, and especially with obviously, as you say, with Rowan recently as well, it's how quickly it can change. So
yeah,
enjoy it.
I mean, this is it. I mean, handling dangerous snakes, it's hard to get insurance for it. I mean, I don't know what the guys at Liverpool were like, but I mean, I remember. I think it was Paul said to me. He said, in the end, it's very hard to get any sort of insurance if you're doing that thing professionally. You just have to take the risk.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. You see, these people, they know what they're doing. They perfect it over time, don't they? As you say, so they know where they are, where they're positioned with it, and with and they are probably in the best position to get bitten, these people who extract, because they're usually very close to hospitals because they've positioned themselves there. They've got the best bite protocols, the best stuff around them.
Don't tempt fate, Ross.
Say that again, sorry?
I said don't tempt fate.
I'm not trying to. So you'd hope that they're very well prepared. So
yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time, and that hour has passed probably the quickest hour I think we've done on this show.
Like it, does it?
No, not at
all.
all.
Like three friends together in a pub swapping snake stories,
Well, that's kind of what we want from this podcast. We want people like yourself to come on to talk about the work you've done, the work that you've got going on, and kind of get to know people a little bit better, and then kind of get to know the situation. As you say, snake. We primarily started this for snakebite research and to kind of help get the story across on the snakebite situation that's currently happening.
Great. I mean, it's really great. I mean, and the more people know about it, the better. I mean, herpetology is surrounded by ignorance, basically. And I mean, we have these fora on Facebook, and the things that people post there.
Oh, sorry.
Are you still here?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, my phone just went weird again.
All right. Well, are we back now?
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah. I was just going to say that there's this forum that I sometimes go on called Digital Farmers Kenya, and it's got about something like 300,000 people who look at it, and they exchange information about farming in Kenya. Once in a while, somebody will post a snake and say, I saw this snake on my farm where I killed this snake. Can you tell me what it is? And somebody posted a picture of a house snake which had been killed and said, do you know what it is? And within an hour, dozens of people had confidently identified this thing as a black mamba. And bizarrely, somebody actually then put beside it a picture of a mamba, which they got off the internet, to prove they were right. And any fool could see these damn things are completely different, And this is it. I mean, in Africa, there's just a tendency to think any dark snake's a black mamba, any green snake's a black mamba, better just bash it. Now, I've every sympathy with the rural dweller who kills a snake near their home. That snake represents a deadly danger to them. But, the more information you can spread, the better. And the fact is, anything like this that heightens awareness, I think is just great.
Yeah, and hopefully we're doing an okay job at it. We seem to be getting guests that we find that are highly respectable and stuff coming on, and who we would class as experts in the fields. We've had people from India, from the Indian Snakebite Institute, we've got someone from the Thai Red Cross coming on in a couple of weeks. We've got we've had Ray Morgan come on and talk about talk about the work that he's doing with the Asclepian Snakebite Institute and stuff, and Michael Starkey from Save the Snakes talking about snake conservation efforts and stuff. So we've had loads of people come on that who are genuinely, we think are respectable people, and then like adding people like yourself to come on to talk and tell us your story and kind of what work you're doing. It just, these episodes that are a little bit lighter and a little bit more kind of, as you say, we're having a conversation about snakes rather than talking necessarily exactly about snakebite and exactly about what you're doing. It makes it worthwhile for people as well who listen, that they've got the opportunity to go, oh, I've read this guy's books, I've seen this guy's papers about and such forth, and oh, I didn't realise that you weren't actually a professional herpetologist, and that makes a big difference, because
yeah, I always say there's not that many professional herpetologists. I mean, you got Edd there; he's a professional herpetologist. But
it depends who you ask.
I will admit, I did have a rant about this, about somebody calling themselves a professional herpetologist and they breed hog noses. I was like, no.
Yeah, I did see that, actually. I mean, the thing is, of course, it's not a professional like being a doctor, where you can't call yourself that unless you've got a formal qualification. I mean, herpetology is literally the study of creeping things. So I think anyone can call himself a herpetologist. But I think you can only call yourself a professional herpetologist if you earn your living from something related to herpetology.
Yeah.
There are a few people like that, Edd included, but not that many.
No, definitely.
No, there's we're quite a unique set of people.
Quite so, yeah.
You've all got dream jobs.
Yeah, that's it. We all get
basically, you all get to play with snakes all day, which the rest of us would all love. Yeah. So that is an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm probably going to wrap it up there, if that's okay, guys. And I think it's been so nice to just kind of have a chat with you, Stephen. It's been absolutely brilliant, in fact.
That's really kind of you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you two. You know, I mean, the information has gone two ways. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so brilliant. That like for me, like as I was saying to Edd earlier, like for me, you are one of the guys that I've always kind of I've had your books, and I kind of always look up to you. And then meeting you the other week was just kind of like, I didn't realise that you wanted to talk to me about Amacatus, and Daryl came wandering over to me. I'd just got off a flight. I think I did okay that day, but I just got off a flight from China that morning at 5 a.m. that morning, and went straight to Drayton Manor from Manchester Airport, and I was just absolutely knackered. Daryl was just like, Stephen wants to talk to you. It's like, not sure this is a good time. And he's just like, no, don't worry, just go and talk to him. So yeah, so for like me, it was an absolute pleasure meeting you, and it's an absolute pleasure again talking to you again, and actually having a conversation not just about one subject, and that makes it's been brilliant, and I think people will really just enjoy this episode. That backward, that hopefully they'll enjoy the forward and backwards, kind of you being able to tell your stories as well as us going a bit sidetracked, and me making a fool of myself a few times on different things and different subjects. So I'd just like to thank everybody from listening again, and I'd still like to thank Stephen once more. I think this has been definitely an absolutely incredible episode, and hopefully everybody will enjoy listening to it. So please remember to like our Facebook page, like our Instagram page, and also to stay in touch with everything. We'll be including some events that are coming up for different venom-based conventions that are coming around the world. We Save the Snakes, who are included in that. There's some in Europe, some in America, so I'll put them up on the page as well. I'll also put some more information up about some of the books that Stephen has wrote, so that if you'd like to get yourselves those books, and I'll put links to where you can buy some of those books as well, where they are available. And we'd just like to thank everybody once more for listening. So thank you and good night.
Up in the interior, you know, we were driving looking for snakes, and my wife became very nervous and said, "Look, you're not going to you're not going walking around here because there might be landmines." And then we came across a wadi where there were a number of camels feeding. And I said to my wife, you know, the Bedouin wouldn't let their camels wander around there if there were landmines, because they get blown up. So we were released to go and sort of hunt in the wadi. Anyway, then we drove on up the road. We came across a police post, and the guys there sort of stopped us and insisted we had a cup of tea with them. And I asked these guys, I said, that, you know, they were basically waiting to see if the Israelis were coming. I said to these policemen up there, I said, are there any landmines in this area? And they said, oh yes, the camels get blown up once in a while. So after that we didn't leave the car again.
I don't blame you at all.
Yeah.
Sorry about the feedback there. It's just my head.